Welcome to Educating Geeks, the podcast where friends help friends discover new passions. We're recording live at Phoenix Comicon today, Thursday, June 5th. We are in the South Building, room 166, and we have a bunch of awesome people with us. Thank you all for joining us. The hosts for today are...
Cassie.
Bri.
I'm Alice.
And I'm Phil.
And we are going to talk about 3 short stories, The Dunwich Horror, Dreams in the Witch House,
The Thing on the Doorstep.
And The Thing on the Doorstep, thank you. None of us had ever read Lovecraft before. We'd heard of him, I think, at least, yeah, but had never read him. And Phil has been a long-time lover of all things Lovecraftian. So, Cassie, why didn't you ever sort of get interested in Lovecraft?
I'm not a horror fan to begin with, and I'd heard of Lovecraft's, like, kind of delving into sci-fi and horror, but it just didn't catch my eye. But just the horror factor was one reason. I'm a wuss, as we've discussed. I'm a wuss about horror stuff.
So, Bri, you like horror. It is in your wheelhouse, so...
Yeah, I was actually a big fan of 4chan's X when I was younger, and I read a lot about Lovecraft, and I read a lot of creepypasta about Lovecraft, but I never actually read Lovecraft.
Yeah, and I'm Cassie. Horror is not in my wheelhouse. It's not something that I generally enjoy, but I knew a lot about Lovecraft because Phil is my bestie. And so Phil, tell us your history with Lovecraft and what appeals to you about him and why you like him so much.
I was introduced to Lovecraft by a friend in high school who lent me one of the Arkham House collections. I kind of wasn't quite sure how to answer that question about why Lovecraft appeals to me. So I will let Lovecraft speak for myself. There's a letter that he wrote, and he says, "I should describe my own nature as tripartite, my interests consisting of 3 parallel and dissociated groups: love of the strange and the fantastic, love of the abstract truth and of scientific logic, love of the ancient and the permanent. Sundry combinations of these 3 strains will probably account for all my odd tastes and eccentricities." So I think those are the 3 things that he deals with: funny kinds of antique and, historical things, mysterious and horrible aspects about life, and scientific logic. So one of the things that I never realized kind of about Lovecraft is that his kind of supernatural horror isn't your typical kind of supernatural that involves angels and demons and ghosts and vampires. There's usually like a stretching of what you could say is scientific fact, but it's possible the things that can happen in a Lovecraft story.
And I would say that reading these stories for me gave me... when Phil read that, I was like, oh yeah, that's Phil. So it was interesting for me because I could totally knowing him, I could totally get why you like him, because it is very much sort of how you are.
Yeah.
So Phil he sort of came up with what we were going to read and why and whatnot. So why did you pick these 3 stories?
Because I was interested, because I know that most everyone in Educating Geeks is a woman, and it is a criticism that is often leveled at Lovecraft, that there just aren't a lot of notable women characters in his stories, and these 3 feature fairly prominent, active female characters, at least with regard to any of his other short stories.
Oh, I was going to say.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm glad you added that bit at the end. So Dunwich Horror has Lavinia Whately. It has the town gossips.
Well, the other villagers.
Right, the other villagers. And I'm missing somebody. Who's the other woman? The
common law wife, or...
Right.
Well, there's the Fry family, the wife in the Fry family.
Mm-hmm. Right, I consider her one of the town gossips, right?
They were obliterated.
Well, yeah.
There's a Mrs. Corey, there's a Mamie Bishop, there's a Sally Sawyer who actually gets 3 paragraphs worth of dialogue, which is pretty amazing. A Selina Fry and Henry Armitage's wife, Mrs. Armitage.
Right.
And that's how many I counted.
And then
and Lavinia.
Right, and Lavinia.
Yeah.
Does Mrs. Armitage count? I feel like she was kind of like the other wife in Thing on the Doorstep, where she was spoken of, but
not really.
Not really there.
Well, she brings him lunch and stuff.
That's very important
good wives
role
do.
for a woman to bring her husband lunch.
Especially when he's so disturbed.
Especially when he's reading the forbidden Necronomicon that everybody seems to read all the time. Whatever. But I did, for the Dunwich Horror, with the female characters anyway, which I actually think of the three, the Dunwich Horror is probably my favorite. To me, it was like, what are women good for? They're good for having babies and gossiping. That's basically what I got out of it.
Having evil babies. Or
yes.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah,
spoiler alert. If you haven't read the story. But again, you've probably heard of some of these characters before if you're at all geeky.
I get spoiled all the time. I'm not going to feel bad about that.
What did you think, Bri?
Lavinia was she was definitely the lead female, if we could call her a lead. And she just kind of had everything that happened in the story put upon her. She never made any real choices of her own. And in that way, she was a weak character, but she also didn't have any personality development, so she was also a weakly written character.
Right. And we talk about that. There's sort of a difference between a weak character versus a weakly written character that has no depth or interest or anything like that.
Yeah, so I don't even remember her speaking until she expressed fear of her family, and that was pretty much it.
Right. How did you like that story otherwise?
Otherwise, I thought it was a pretty good story. I really enjoyed it. I thought we had a good antagonist, and I was genuinely surprised by the ending.
Was I genuinely surprised by the ending?
I thought you said you were confused by the ending.
Well, no, I was confused by the whole... So this is what happened to me. I read the story, and then, you're right, you're presenting a panel, you're talking on a podcast, whatever. You do prep work, right? You do a little bit of research. So I read the story, and then I read about the story, and basically my reaction was like, wait, what happened? Wait, well, who? Wait, they're twin brothers? What? Who went? Where? What happened? And so I had to go back and I read it again and then I listened to it again. And I was like, oh, okay, I feel better now. And I was like, what was I half asleep the first time that I read the story? You're not paying attention? Because I did not get it all the first time for sure.
And it was the first one I read as well. And it took a while to get used to Lovecraft's narrative style. It's definitely different than anything I've read before. There's more description than actual dialogue, and the descriptions he throws out there are just so difficult to wrap your mind around. I had to go back and read Wilbur's description of his full body 5 times before I could fully picture what I believed he would look like.
All the anuses and the mouths and the tentacles.
It's called adjectivitis.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Phil. How about you, Cassie?
It was actually the last one that I had read of the 3, and we had talked about it, and I got spoiled, as I often do, and I didn't mind. I always get spoiled about stuff. But as I was reading, I was seeing the clues. So unfortunately, I cannot objectively say if I would have figured it out on my own, because I knew that they were brothers. But there were definitely the clues, so maybe I guess, like you say, if you read it on a second, after you read that final line from Armitage, and then...
And have we done a rundown of what the story is actually about, or are we just talking about?
We're just talking about stuff
in
general.
Maybe
So for that handful of people that we saw who don't have great exposure to Lovecraft or perhaps haven't read the Dunwich Horror, Phil, give us a rundown, brief.
Okay, so the first thing that I do want to say is the one thing that does strike me that is interesting about Lavinia Whately is that old wizard Whately does teach her some stuff.
But if you give the description first, they might know who that is.
Oh, God,
but it has to be short and to the point. But you have to do it.
Short and to the point with H.P. Lovecraft.
With H.P. Lovecraft.
Oh, jeez. So there's this town called Dunwich, and there's a family, the Whateleys, consisting of old wizard Whately, his daughter Lavinia, and her son Wilbur. Mysterious things happen at their farmhouse after the birth of Wilbur, who also grows at an amazing rate. So at 4 years old, he's the physical size of a 10-year-old, and when he's 15, he's like an 18-year-old or something. And the Whateleys are not a reputable family, and everyone in town knows that there's black magic involved, and there's strange adjustments that keep happening at the farmhouse. They keep buying lots of farm animals, but they don't really have a herd, and Enlargements happen. Wilbur needs the Necronomicon for something, so he goes to Miskatonic University, tries to borrow it from the librarian. Librarian says, no, you can't borrow that. Wilbur tries to steal it, ends up getting killed for it. And then later on in Dunwich, a horror is released, which wreaks havoc all over the countryside. Professor Armitage, who is the librarian, reads the Necronomicon, finds Wilbur Whately's diary, deciphers some things, and finds out that, God, I hate doing spoilers like this, that Wilbur has a twin brother. Lavinia was, basically raped by Yog-Sothoth. She had twins. Wilbur was the only one who kind of looked human. The twin was the one who did not look human. But with the entire family dead, the brother broke out of the farmhouse, wreaked havoc. So Henry Armitage has to consult the Necronomicon to... I don't really know what happens to his brother, whether or not, Armitage opens a gate and the brother gets sucked through, or whether...
That was my assumption.
He somehow destroys his brother, but that is the end of the Dunwich Horror.
That was the whole thing, actually. That
was actually really good.
Nice
work, Phil. I thought it was interesting that in this story, and to be honest, when I was reading these, I was like, I knew that we were focusing on the women, and I was like, there's no point. I might as well just focus on the characters that are the focus.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting that the perspective changes. So we go from, in the Dunwich Horror, focusing on Wilbur, and then once he passes, then it's Armitage's journey.
Yeah, it's Armitage's story.
So it's like, even though Wilbur, I guess, you could say he was the protagonist, but, the kind of oddball protagonist, and it's all told through an objective third-person point of view. So it's never like Wilbur telling us what's going on. It's always us being told about what's going on with Wilbur. But I thought that was an interesting kind of switch where they kind of he took one character, and then in order to take care of this Dunwich Horror, we have to follow the professor.
Yes, the professor.
Yeah.
Which I love the professor.
Yeah,
one of the things I like about these stories in general is that in a culture where our heroes are, Iron Man and Captain America and Green Arrow, and don't get me wrong, I love those guys, but the heroes in this are, old guys with, coats and patches on their elbows who read books, and they're the heroes of the story, and there's something about that really appeals to me. Yes?
In fairness, they're also the villains of the story.
I'm sorry, what was that?
In fairness, the villains of the story have the same description.
True.
What did he say?
In all fairness, the heroes, the villains of the story have the same description. So I guess in general, I like that these stories aren't about big buff guys who break shit and fly around. I like it that it's about really smart guys who read stuff and solve problems. And that really did appeal to me. Thank you for that.
If you like gory descriptions, if you like really gross stuff, Wilbur's passing
that's pretty
so gruesome, and that's what you're talking about. Suddenly his true form is revealed. So this whole time we think he's this odd, goatish, bizarre kind of odd looking guy, but then once his clothes are removed, it's all these. And as someone who doesn't read that, I was truly disgusted by it, but I can see about.
I thought it was pretty cool.
I can see that perspective for people who like that too.
So did anyone else think it was kind of strange? Because, it's like everybody knows what's going on. It's like it's not really that weird. Like, the townspeople are like, there's weird stuff that happens and cows go missing, whatever.
I think if I lived in that town and there was no chance of me escaping, I'd probably just be like, yeah, they're into the occult, but I haven't gotten hurt so far, so keep on at it. Don't care.
You do you, I'm going to do me. Yeah. I don't know.
Oh, man. They were kind of painted as they were absolutely painted as a podunk town, so.
Yeah.
Very much,
it's the backwoods kind of decrepit inbred.
Yeah.
That's actually exactly how they described it at the beginning of the story.
Right, yeah.
And that just kind of adds to the, the ancientness of the hills of Massachusetts and how mysterious it is because these people are so isolated.
Right.
From civilization, so to speak.
I will say that I enjoyed a lot of his writing style. Sometimes I got a little bogged down in it. In general, I liked the descriptions. I thought they were very well done. But I did struggle with the Dunwich Horror in particular, when he writes the vernacular. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right, so he writes the vernacular, and I struggled anyway in trying to parse out what was actually being said.
That irritated me. When you brought it to my attention, I was at least prepared, but I was so irritated. Like, there was no rhyme or reason. If you've read it, and it may be the version that I had, but there were no italics, it wasn't indented, it was very purposely written, just like it was regular text, which to me just seemed like...
In my version, it's italicized. So
is it italicized?
You could see it. You could tell when it was coming.
Yeah, no, it was like... And it was Amazon, I don't know, but I got the impression that it was purposely meant to be like a question as to what's part of the story and what's the excerpt of what they were reading. Right. I was like, why?
No, I mean, Lovecraft wanted to really give you an authentic taste of of life for those villagers and their accents and the way that they spoke.
Oh, you know what? I misinterpreted what Alice was saying in terms of. I'm sorry. The excerpts of the book that he was reading.
From the Necronomicon?
Yeah, you were talking about the vernacular. You were talking about how they were their accents.
Their accent, yeah,
their
how
weird
he writes
accents.
The accents.
Yeah, no, and the excerpts, I don't know, was your guys' version set up like that? Where you can't really tell
indented and everything, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, what's going on there? He's like trying to confuse us. I guess that's kind of his thing.
Yeah.
Maybe it was purposeful. Stylistic.
So what was so I read the Dunwich Horror first. What's the next thing that people read? Or what was the first thing you read, Cassie? What did you read first?
I read the thing on the doorstep. Has anyone read that? The doorstep? Yeah. I actually liked it. Apparently it wasn't as well received.
And should we give a quick rundown of the thing on the
Phil,
doorstep?
Give a quick rundown. You did great last time.
So, Thing on the Doorstep is one of Lovecraft's narrator stories. So there is a character who is telling you what is happening, unlike Dunwich Horror, which is third-person omniscient. So our narrator is Daniel Upton, who knows a young man named Edward Darby. Darby is a kind of precocious young man who likes to dabble in the occult, which is a kind of interest they have together for a little bit. Upton marries, has a family, etc. And since he's telling the story, we learn that Edward Darby meets a woman named Asenath Waite, who is described as good-looking, dark, with over-protuberant eyes. And they have a courtship, and they get married. Is Ephraim Waite already dead when they get married?
Yes.
I think, yeah. So she does. Yes. She has a history of coming from a weird family, and they're married for about 3 years or something. And Edward starts having funny attacks, and he tells Upton about basically that he feels like someone is invading his personality, and he'll wake up and suddenly find himself in a place where he didn't expect. And it turns out that Asenath is switching personalities with him and trying to take over his body permanently. And later on, we learn that it's not even her, it's actually her father's soul or spirit, which is a very, very interesting aspect of the story. It's kind of like, what does Lovecraft say about, do humans have souls? Or what is this kind of thing where you can actually inhabit somebody else's body with your spirit? At any rate, we find out that it's actually Ephraim Waite, her father, and we find out that she died when she was very, very young, and basically he's trying to take over Edward Darby's body so that he can live for longer than he already has. So one day, Edward comes over to Daniels and says, everything is fine now. I've broken off with Asenath, and she's decided to move back to Innsmouth, which is a very other nice connection to Lovecraft's other stories. So she's gone now. Everything's perfectly fine, etc. And then one night, or at any rate, there's another conversation that happens, and Edward Darby says, "Oh, she's back. She's trying to take me over again. Help me. I don't remember what happens after that. But then one night, in the middle of the night, Daniel Upton gets a phone call, picks up the phone, glub, glub. I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're trying to say. Glub, 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 glub. And I love the line, which is like, I'm sorry, I think you should call information. And then there's a knock at the door, and there's a thing on the doorstep, and it's, this huddled figure with a letter that's written on the end of a pencil, and he reads the letter, and it turns out that Edward murdered Asenath, thinking that by killing her, that would end Ephraim Waite's abilities to travel from body to body, but it's not true. So even though Asenath's body is gone, Ephraim manages to come back from the dead. He takes over Darby's body. Darby ends up in Asenath's body, which has been buried in the basement of his house for 3 months. So that's why there is a deliquescent horror on the doorstep at the end of the story. Edward, actually, that's true. I'm sorry, I forgot. Edward has been in an asylum. That's what happens when he has his final attack, when he's really Ephraim Waite. After Daniel reads the letter, he goes to the asylum and he shoots his friend, Edward Darby, who is actually Ephraim Waite.
You don't have to read the short story again, so that was the whole thing.
No, if you haven't read it, I mean, I don't know why. Maybe it was because it was the first one that I read, but I mean, there were 2 really creepy parts that I liked to that.
Which were they?
In the car, during one of the moments, because what's happening is when Edward is being taken over by Ephraim, he finds himself like in the woods when he gets his body back. So there's a moment where he had a freak out in a small town, and so they called his friend Daniel, and Daniel comes to pick him up. And as they're driving back, and it's these creepy towns, like in between the towns, it's just stretches of darkness essentially. And Edward is like inconsolable, he's freaking out, and Daniel's listening, even though he's not really taking him seriously. And Edward is like explaining in detail what's happening to him, and then he has a seizure, and he takes control of Edward's body again, and it is the creepiest thing because he is just so calm as he pretty much just tells Daniel not to take anything that he said seriously. And it's just the way that it's written there and in the asylum. As someone who doesn't like bloody horror, but likes that kind of creepy
sort of
psychological aspect, like, it was pretty cool because for me that was like a cool shiver down the spine.
I think Asenath was probably actually my favorite character of the 3 short stories we read. And she had a lot of personality and a lot of spice and kick to her. And then it turned out it's because she was a man trapped in a woman's body in a time where women didn't get to hold, like, land titles or anything. She didn't have any power as a woman, so he got married to take over a new host, basically.
I don't know why, total aside, when you said that. What's the movie about? Victoria. That's what it is. Victor Victoria. Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting. So the fact that it turns out not to be, it's him and he's switching bodies but he's married to a guy, but it's a guy, and the whole implications there of all of that for the time that it was written, which was in the 1930s, I think, is a pretty, pretty provocative kind of tale.
Even
really.
if it was, I mean, I read that whole thing and assumed there was like no sort of sexual interaction.
Yeah, that's the thing with Lovecraft writing it. I mean, for us today, it was just like, wow, what a weird transgender thing. And I actually found a website. It was like old, like GeoCities or something. But somebody actually kept track of transgender characters in like science fiction, fantasy, horror comics. And Asenath Waite was one of them.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, when Lovecraft writes these stories about like alien rape and, getting it on with a deep one and, all these kinds of miscegenation, I mean, for him it was like the other, and that's what was really, gross about it. But I mean, this whole thing about they were married for 3 years. I mean, like, how did Ephraim Waite like being in a woman, how did he deal with being in a woman's body? But I think for Lovecraft it was just kind of like, he needed that as a horrible plot device. And I don't think it ever entered his mind about those kind of,
I don't think
that
it's like
part of human relations.
Like they did it on, Farscape, where they're all like, oh, I've got boobs now. I mean, I'm not imagining that as the characters in the Lovecraft story. But nonetheless, it's a pretty, well, and as you brought up, the whole concept of, do you have a soul, and what does that mean exactly if your personality, or what is it that would be taking over the other body? What does that really mean? So from a thinking person's perspective, I enjoyed that story as well. But I'm definitely with Bri, where you're like, oh, I guess not. There's not really a woman in this story at all.
She's
that
just
was
accepting early feminism because she's like, I'm a man, damn it.
Well, there is one person who, because it's pretty clear that Asenath is probably a Deep One hybrid, because Ephraim marries someone from Innsmouth, and the mother always goes about veiled, and she never ventures out of the home.
So as a person who's not a Lovecraftian scholar, I don't know what you mean when you say a deep one.
Okay. A deep one is a fish kind of Bactrian species that lives under the sea, who have some sort of worship relationship with Cthulhu, and Dagon and Mother Hydra. But they're one of Lovecraft's alien races who are working to undermine humanity. But The Shadow over Innsmouth, which is the story in which the Deep Ones feature the most, for reasons of wealth and power, there is interbreeding between Deep Ones and humans. And what's interesting is it does get carried over into the thing on the doorstep. But Deep Ones are supposed to live a really, really long time, and in the story, Edward Darby says Ephraim Waite just kind of travels from body to body because he wants to live forever. And there is one scholar who, or something that I read on the internet, where it's a little bit strange because Deep Ones and Deep One hybrids are supposed to live a long time anyway. So there's a question of
why?
Yeah. So why does he bother? And it's because he wants to be in a man's body and not a woman's body.
So she was just temporary. I'd just like to point out that Phil uses a lot of big words, and I don't know what they mean. Yes, sir.
I think it's not that he just doesn't prefer a woman's body. I think there's a line in there where it's like a woman's brain isn't as good at magic or something.
Yeah.
So the gentleman in the audience made a point that it's not that he doesn't necessarily want a woman's body; it's that a woman's mind isn't as adept at doing magical arts as a man's. Yeah, in the back there.
I guess the other part is, if you're wondering why he's switching bodies, because the Deep One hybrids, they live so long and then they can't go out in public anymore, so they have to go into the sea. So if you wanted to maintain a presence on land outside of Innsmouth, you probably want to switch bodies.
Yeah, but it turns into lakes, they start becoming very fish-like, like that creature from the Black Lagoon picture you had. They can no longer go out in society and have to stay in the water.
Oh, so is that what that word means?
I'm learning so much right now.
Okay.
So, you want to repeat what they were saying about?
So we had a couple of audience members educate us about how the oh my God, now I forgot their names.
The Deep Ones.
The Deep Ones. Thank you. After they live a really long time, they can't remain on land anymore, and so they turn into black lagoonish looking, like the creature from the Black Lagoon.
Well, they become more Deep One than human.
Okay, so they become more fishy than human, and they go into the water. So in the story, he's trying to take over human bodies because he doesn't want to become more fish-like. Yes, ma'am.
And the thing about the male line being better at magic than the female line kind of undermines the superstition that only females are witches. So it combats the superstition at the same time.
That's true. I am just learning. I mean, I've never studied the, what witchcraft and that whole thing, but I really didn't know until fairly recently that being a witch is both genders.
Yes, and the comment from the audience was that generally you think of a witch and you think female, and this undermines that by saying males are better at sorcery and witchcraft.
Right. And I did like the mechanic, which is a pretty common mechanic, that, you start out at the beginning and then you go backwards and then you end up where you started, because he talks about, I think it starts, like I shot my friend. Yeah.
But I didn't shoot my friend.
Let
me explain.
Yeah.
Let's Tarantino this.
Let's Tarantino this. I like that. So then the last story Phil had us read was The Dreams in the Witch House, which we are recording today next to the haunted house. So it's kind of reminding me of that story, except with less scratching and more screaming. But nonetheless, so Phil, can you give us a rundown of... He's rolling his eyes for those of you who aren't in the room and just listening on the podcast.
Walter Gilman is a student at Miskatonic University in Arkham. He knows about the witch house where a witch named Keziah Mason lived, and there are stories that she was able to travel across different dimensions, and he is a student of physics, and so he actually wants to find out. And I actually think there's kind of a funny line. Basically he was like, he found out the room was free and and immediately desired to move into it. So he really does want to find out, what it is that Keziah is doing. And again, what's kind of funny, in the same way that the Dunwich Horror is funny, everyone in town knows about Keziah Mason and that she was a witch who disappeared in 1692, and yet she still shows up every now and then in
on
Arkham.
All Hallows Eve.
And they know that she chooses a sacrifice.
Yeah.
Well, my kid's been marked.
That's the other funny line. 1 or 2 children might disappear that evening. It might happen.
We'll just pop out a few more. No big deal.
No biggie.
Yeah. So she has a familiar named Brown Jenkin, and lo and behold, Walter Gilman starts having funny dreams in which Keziah and Brown Jenkin come to visit him, and they do travel to first of all, they travel interdimensionally, which, when I was reading, reminded me of whenever Buckaroo Banzai crosses across the 8th dimension. Strange amorphous shapes, blah, 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 blah.
One of my favorite movies of all time.
But it's pretty clear he ends up on, planets that are how many, million light years away. He's instantly transported to various parts of Arkham without visiting, without actually walking to them. And one of the, the scholar S.T. Joshi does, bring up, there are lots of plot holes in Dreams of Witchhead. Oh, sorry, I don't want to do that right now. So, so Walter increasingly is like, I don't understand what's going on. These dreams are very, very strange. And basically he finds out that the transportations have been real. And the action becomes confused, which is a wonderful old line from Things That Happen. So the action becomes confused. He ends up in the attic. Keziah tries to sacrifice a young child, and does she succeed? I don't remember if she succeeds.
She doesn't succeed.
No, she doesn't succeed.
But right. Brown Jenkins does.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Brown Jenkins. Yeah. So Walter manages to kill Keziah, but Brown Jenkins finishes the sacrifice of the infant, and does Walter end up in an asylum?
No,
I'm confused
because
we watched the movie last night.
The movie ruined everything.
In the book, he ends up deaf from traveling between dimensions, I think, without her. He makes a last-ditch effort to get out of there. Yeah. He ends up having to stay in his friend's room, and his friend wakes up to see blood just pooling across the duvet.
And horrific screaming. And
the guy's screaming, he's still deaf, he can't communicate anything, and they pull the cover back, and a rat skitters out and goes into a rat hole.
And Brown Jenkins is tunneled through his body.
Yes.
Yeah.
That damn rat. So Keziah, interestingly enough, has some agency in the story. I mean, she's sort of this very clever, this very smart witch who has figured out, the mathematics to travel through to other dimensions. So she does at least have some.
She has a boss.
Yeah.
She's doing a lot of shit on her own.
She has a boss?
Does she ever speak?
Yeah, the black man.
The black man.
Yeah. Oh, the black man. He was the boss?
Yeah.
I don't know why.
He's a bad dude.
I mean, I figured because the rat was messing with him. I don't know why I thought he was subservient. And he was just so gross. He was covered in mud. There was some sort of.
I don't know.
The description for him was very interesting, almost like earthly or.
Well, it never felt consistent for me, frankly. I couldn't tell what was going on with him through the whole story.
Yeah, which I think is what you were going to talk about, that Joshi says about that there are a lot of plot holes in this one, and it's not the tightest story.
Yeah, the main one. Yeah, the main one is that when Walter Gilman is duking it out with Keziah, he kicks Brown Jenkins into this gulf that's supposed to be some big black hole or something, and so that theoretically would have been the end of Brown Jenkins, but somehow Brown Jenkins comes back to kill Walter Gilman.
I do remember that. I do remember rereading that, wait, what?
Yeah, where did he come back from?
Yeah. My impression was that it was first person, so his assumption was a bottomless hole, kick. And he thought that he was taken care of, but he in fact was not. Mm. So it was more of a first person perspective.
Right.
Oh, I've done it. Yay, I win.
Yeah.
shit, no, I didn't.
No.
Right. And for me, the story it really felt, more than it felt like horror, it felt like science fiction to me. And
Very
all
much.
of the descriptions of him being in the alternate dimension, and he brings back the thing from the fence and all of that kind of stuff. It felt very science fiction to me and not very horror-like.
And that's actually what I liked about it, even though it was personally my least favorite. We didn't ask how many people had read the Dreams in the Witch House. How many
Dreams
people
in the
had
Witch House.
Yeah, not one of his popular ones.
Yeah. How many liked Dreams in the Witch? You guys dug it?
All right.
Yeah.
If you read it.
Yeah, if you had it, yeah. I mean, I liked that aspect. I did like the description of this sort of interdimensional traveling, and I like that he brought something back and that no one could explain it. And
Unknown elements.
The unknown, yeah, and that it boggled everyone's mind, and that it ended up in a museum. After
it dragged for me in parts, like when he's out and it's the description of the Northern Lights and all that kind of stuff. I was kind of like, can we move the plot along a little bit faster, please? And
there's the things that kind of confuse me about Dreams in the Witch House are, why did Keziah want Walter Gilman to sign the big book? Who was the black? I mean, the thing about the black man and Brown Jenkins, I think Lovecraft was just kind of using conventional notions of witchcraft that. Witches are minions of Satan, who is often representative as a black man, and they have familiars, second names that you take on when you join a coven. It was like, why did she want Walter to sign the book? Why did she take him on all these really, honestly, fantastic trips, to various places? Was she like enticing him to join her?
Well, maybe it's because he was, although he had a fever for like forever. I don't even nobody was like, go to the doctor, dude.
Well, he kept thinking about it.
He did keep thinking about it. I never got there.
That's exactly how I'm
But,
with the doctor.
he was doing
Don't like
it maybe because he was targeted, and let me tell you, I'm just making this shit up. Because he was good at math, right? And he's being so successful at the calculations and getting closer to where he is, so she thinks he's a worthy person to bring on board in the big bad. I don't know.
My impression was that this is something that she attempts fairly often because people would not stay in the room very long due to being bitten and stuff like that, and that it made it easier for her to have help, to have somebody who was already in the world anyway who could take care of the sacrifice for her to get another minion. If we are saying that the black man is like Satan, then it would be getting another soul for her boss. So that's just kind of the impression I got.
No, that's a good impression.
Lovecraft. There's some Lovecraftians who just say that the black man is just another avatar of Nyarlathotep, which is another of Lovecraft's god alien creatures.
Old ones.
Old ones.
Yeah.
Old ones. What were you gonna say?
Well, part of the backing for that theory of the black man being Nyarlathotep is that Nyarlathotep is also described as, to put it mildly, being African. He was actually a pharaoh.
Oh yeah.
Okay, you have to
Who's
repeat
this guy
that.
you guys are talking about? Why don't you explain what he just said?
Yeah, you have to.
Nyarlathotep? Nyarlathotep is a weird one. So yeah, it's Lovecraft wrote an entire story called Nyarlathotep, and he is described as coming out of Egypt. So there's this kind of idea that he was once maybe a pharaoh or something like that. But the mythology that's built up around Nyarlathotep is really confusing. So in that short story, he is described as basically a human. So as an ancient Egyptian. But I don't know if it was Lovecraft or all the people that have used Nyarlathotep. One of Nyarlathotep's nicknames is the Crawling Chaos, and he's basically become a messenger for all of the other gods that are mentioned. So like Cthulhu and Azathoth and Yog-Sothoth, he kind of is their intermediary, and he, brings messages to humans, or he's kind of a go-between. And he's even developed to have he has 1,000 forms or 10,000 forms, and being a black-skinned man is just one of them. But he can appear in all different other kinds of guises. I'm just kind of really confused by what Nyarlathotep is, except for this messenger that because I've also read sometimes he is considered a servitor of the other gods, and yet sometimes he can act very independently of them at the same time. So, yes.
What is, I can't pronounce his name, but there was, my least favorite story was, I think it was the stories of Unknown Chada or whatever. Do you know that?
Yeah, the Dream Quest, yeah.
But I mean, that one he gets fleshed out a lot because he's the main bad guy in that one, trying, right? And he, the main protagonist and trying to get to his dream city, and Nyarlathotep keeps throwing obstacles in his way, and is actually in charge of the movies and all the other ridiculous stuff that happens in that story.
Yeah, we are having a Lovecraftian geek out right here, right now, people. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I wish you had a mic.
Go ahead, Phil. Repeat that. Go for it.
So we have an audience member who is recounting the dream quest of Unknown Kadath, in which do you remember what the protagonist's name is? Is it Randolph Carter in that one? Yeah. Okay. Or
we're getting a no. We're getting a no from another audience member.
Oh, that's the Silver Key. All right.
No, because he's described as coming from a Greek city.
Oh well. So, but in the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, the protagonist is just trying to get to his dream city, and Nyarlathotep is the villain in the piece who tries to prevent him from proceeding. Yeah, I mean, I think definitely for sure Nyarlathotep is considered some sort of evil entity, but he's a kind of multifaceted entity who sometimes can help the other gods and operates independently. That's about all I can do.
Cool. So, Phil also suggested, as we talked a little about, for those who were in the room early, we kind of already talked a little bit about, we also watched the film, The Dunwich Horror from the 70s with Sandra Dee, if I'm remembering correctly.
Dean Stockwell.
And Dean Stockwell. And then we also watched the Dreams in the Witch House, but it's the Showtime show from...
Masters of Horror.
Masters of Horror. So we watched those two films. So Cassie.
Yes.
Give us a rundown, girl. What'd you think?
Oh my gosh, they completely bastardized the stories. In both cases, shamelessly. And normally as a filmmaker and aspiring screenwriter, whatever, I was just I normally defend film adaptations because obviously concessions have to be made to make it work. And watching these, I was just this was unnecessary. These were unnecessary choices. They,
all the thigh rubbing.
The thigh rubbing.
There's a lot of thigh rubbing in the Dunwich Horror.
If you want to see what 70s softcore porn looks like with a little bit of H.P. Lovecraft mixed in. And P.S. James Franco could play the Stockwell character.
Cassie. Cassie.
I was on Facebook.
Even worse.
For shame. I'm getting messaged by people. Okay, so...
She's important.
No. People are asking about panelist passes. This is serious business. So I feel like literally James Franco could have been the Dean Stockwell. The whole time I was watching, I was and I was strangely attracted to this freak.
Oh, really? Because there was one scene where the girls are talking have you seen his eyes? He's so dreamy. And his eyes are
terrifying. I can't explain it.
No.
I honestly cannot explain what was going on in that movie.
I'm worried about you now, Cassie.
I know. I'm worried about myself.
Oh, goodness.
I'm worried about myself, to be honest.
You know what he looks like from the waist down. That ain't human.
Whatever. Oh my God. What has happened? What's happening right now?
That was interesting. And if you haven't seen the movie, if you get a chance to see it, do, just for the...
Get some whiskey and some popcorn and a few friends and have a good time.
We had a consensus of how many people had seen it, but how many people have seen the 1970s? We've got about a fourth, fifth of the room.
5, 7.
Yeah.
You don't know what you're missing, the rest of you. Don't know what you're
Thigh rubbing, that's what you're missing.
And we haven't spoiled anything, but basically all they keep is the names, and then they add a couple of people, and then the story is just completely different.
Completely different.
Like, well, suddenly female characters are, and that's how you knew. That's how you knew it wasn't right. There were all kinds of female characters taking stand and
getting their thighs
each
rubbed.
other.
They're speaking to each other. This isn't right.
Yes, ma'am.
When you said that, if you think about it, the contemporaries, when he actually wrote the story originally, it was probably before women even had the right to vote. And then like J.R.R. Tolkien maybe, it was, we didn't have a lot of women, but then you jump ahead to when they filmed this film, and women had a lot more presence and a lot more rights and a lot more equality, and so then they become, changes over time.
Yeah, and
sure,
they had to sell the
point.
movie. You're right. You're talking about the difference in when the story was originally written, which is in 1932, published in 1933, versus when the film was produced in 1970, and
the
women's
sexual
of women.
revolution has happened. Yeah.
Right in the middle of the women's lib movement during the 1970s and a lot of it.
Yeah. You're right in that same area. Certainly, you're right. So, although there are plenty of movies that get made today without a whole hell of a lot of women in them. I'm just saying.
Can anybody confirm for me in Thing on the Doorstep? Does Asenath drive?
Yes, she does, and her husband does
Yeah.
not drive.
Right, yeah.
So
right.
whenever
So it's like
she-
significant that a woman is driving a car.
Yeah.
and that was the
in that
clue.
story.
Spoiler alert: when
clue.
things weren't quite right, suddenly Edward was driving.
Yeah, like, hey, I got this. Usually I'm terrified of driving, but I'm fine now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then, what were you going to say something?
About
the movie?
Well, I don't know. I mean, Sandra Dee is an invented character.
Yeah.
She's
completely.
kind of... I mean,
she's invented so
and
she can have her thighs
unnecessary.
rubbed.
what I was going to say was, in the history of Lovecraft movies, basically up to that point, I mean, there are some that Roger Corman made that are actually even more bastardized, that are even more watered down. Dunwich Horror is actually pretty faithful to at least the major plot points, except for the fact that Wilbur doesn't die, actually, in this one.
And he rubs a lot of thighs.
She can't get over it.
But the representation of the twin is actually not that bad because I actually did some stills in it, and when you see the twin is basically represented by a bunch of rubber snake heads.
Yeah, just peanut can
that
snakes.
just kind of come at you. But there is a face in the middle of that. There is a human face in the middle of that. You can see eyes and nose and eyebrows. And I kind of figured they would have made Dean Stockwell do that, but for what you can see, I can't tell if it's him or not.
No.
Yeah, I don't think
I'm not
so.
watching to find
There are
out.
also a lot of psychedelic colors going on, so it's just like...
Yeah.
Blue red. They were fraternal.
Yeah, there you go.
Right.
Good point. She said they were fraternal twins.
And
Very
and
funny.
We were given the impression they were.
Yeah. So then the Dreams in the Witch House was 2005, we established. And it's,
And they set it in modern times, so...
yeah, they set it in modern times.
He's a
And they
physicist.
conveniently changed the roommate to a woman. I think, Phil, you were pointing out that they probably did that so they could have the baby at the ready. So she's a woman who has a baby with her.
And they could have some romance and unnecessary, insanely unnecessary
sex. Yeah.
So they don't have to pay for different sets to be built.
Right,
Yeah,
it's
that
all in
too,
the house.
probably. Yeah.
Oh, there was worse
There was
than
more
that.
rubbing than that. There was more than thigh
was
rubbing.
showtime.
Maybe some thigh rubbing and some other stuff. Some thigh rubbing thigh.
Like, you need to
It was
be
full.
prepared.
It was full frontal. There was full.
There
female
was.
full frontal.
And as soon as it happened, I was very surprised because that didn't happen at all in the book.
Yeah, no.
I don't think H.P. Lovecraft believes in, sex between
Well, we
two
were
humans.
He's
talking
a
about that.
pretty
That people think
repressed
he's
guy.
pretty asexual.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I got that
Lovecraft was
impression.
pretty asexual. What did his wife say? His wife said one of his shows of affection was to twine his pinky finger around hers and say oomph.
Wow.
How long did that marriage last?
A couple years.
Too long.
But mostly they were in different states.
I'm shocked.
Yeah, it wasn't much of a marriage. It wasn't
What
much
was
of
that?
a marriage.
It wasn't much of a...
We anti-Semitic, and she was Jewish.
So he considered her.
Her bad. That was her bad.
Oh, gotcha.
Our audience member said he was anti-Semitic and she was Jewish.
Yes, but she was secular enough that it wasn't a problem.
Her bad.
Yeah,
That's all I have to say.
she was also a career woman.
Yeah, she was a career woman. She had a business. Yeah.
So one of the things that we do on the Educating Geeks podcast every time is we're all, except for Phil, we're all drinkers, and so we. Thank you, Andrea. So we come up with drinking game rules for all of our topics. And so that's what we're going to do now. So for those of you who have read these stories or seen these movies, thank you guys. Start thinking of drinking game rules that you could have, and please, shout them out and let us know what they are. So I'm going to start and just say that every time somebody reads the Forbidden freaking Necronomicon, you have to take a shot.
Yes, agreed.
I'm going to say if you're watching Dreams in the Witch House, every time you see a nipple, you have to take a drink.
We're headed down the drunk road.
Yeah.
Anytime someone goes through Arkham or mentions how scared they are of Innsmouth.
Of Innsmouth, yeah.
Of Innsmouth. So Arkham and Innsmouth references a shot apiece.
A shot?
A shot apiece.
Damn. Okay.
Oh wait, maybe not. Maybe for Arkham, mentioning that it's either the story's taking place in Arkham or how scared someone is of going to Innsmouth. I was going to say take a shot apiece, but you're right. In a couple of these, you'd be dead. So maybe just a drink.
Yeah.
Use your discretion.
Yes.
Conserve the liver.
There's no bigger tea, so I can have my next party.
Right. So the three books that we read, the three short stories that we read were the Dunwich Horror, The Thing on the Doorstep, and The Dreams in the Witch House. And the two movies that we watched were the 1970s, The Dunwich Horror, and the 2005, The Dreams in the Witch House.
So if you just feel like reading and drinking, this is the way to go.
This is the way to go.
Yes.
You had talked about the basically gratuitous sex in the 70s versions of the movies. Well, about 1968 to 1970 is when all restrictions, censorship was lifted on the movies, and they just went crazy and added all kinds of gratuitous sex, whether it was necessary or needed or useful to the plot or not. There it was.
Yes, our audience member brings up a good point about the change, and I can't remember if that was MPAA related or what was going on at that point, but between 1968 and 1970, it was definitely an awakening of
and just to clarify, the 1970s version of the movie just has a lot of thigh rubbing. It's the 2005
Well,
version
I mean,
that has
it's a
gratuitous
lot
sex.
of moaning, and she's a lot of like...
A lot of moaning. There's like
okay,
5
so
solid
that's it.
minutes of moaning.
For every moan, you got to take a sip.
Yes.
For every moan, you got to take a sip.
Sip wisely.
I mean, the 70s Dunwich Horror is definitely reflective of the time because all the cultists are hippies.
Yes.
So
they
what's
are.
that? Take a shot for every hippie? There were
Once again,
3
you'll be
hippies.
dead.
Yeah.
But do watch that movie with alcohol at the ready.
It was every time a train schedule is described in detail, you have to take a shot. I can be down with that. Yes, ma'am.
Anytime the word eldritch is used, is 2 sips.
Nice.
Eldritch?
Yeah.
Anytime the word eldritch is used, 2 sips.
2 sips. I like it.
Anytime demons and aliens and transdimensional beings are used interchangeably, because there was quite a bit of like evil and religious, and I just got confused. I needed a drink when I read it.
The only drinking rule I came up with was really prosaic for the movie, and that's basically whenever Sandra Dee drinks from her teacup, you take a
Ooh, every time he knocks
a
his
good one.
ring against the green...
against wood or something.
No, he knocks it against this like green glob.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
those big plasticky glowy blobs.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
He said they were glass, even though they were only like 2 ounces each.
Yes.
Right.
But
no,
he
that's a
knocked it.
classic. That's good. That was a good one, Phil. That's classic.
One's name is mentioned. Specifically, take a shot.
Nice.
All right, an old one's name is mentioned. You got to take a shot. That's a good one.
Now, is that Yog-Sothoth and Azathoth? Are those the old ones?
Yes.
I'm impressed with you saying those words.
Cthulhu, clearly. Shub-Niggurath.
Yeah,
Ooh, I didn't read that one.
The other one is the Yellow Man.
The Yellow Man, Hastur, Chiglagroth. What is that? I'm not going to try.
Sugar Man, whatever.
I say in the short stories, every time a woman actually talks, you get to take a drink.
You get to take a drink. In the back there.
We'd all be sober.
Somebody faints, you take a shot.
All right, every time somebody faints, you take a shot. That's
I
a
don't
good one,
blame
too.
them with the Dunwich Horror.
Oh my goodness.
There was a lot of reason to faint, yeah?
Every trip to Miskatonic University, you take one to the road.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. So every trip to Miskatonic University, you take one for the road.
Nice.
I
And
like
that
it.
is represented in the 2005 movie, by the way. He wears a t-shirt that has Miskatonic.
Miskatonic University on it.
And-
Yep.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Every time the big bad is revealed, you down the drink.
All right.
Oh,
Every
I like it.
time
Every
the
time
big-
the big bad is revealed, you got to empty your glass.
I like it.
I like it.
And every time you have to read a paragraph again because you feel like you missed something, you have to take a drink.
I like because that's
Big
going to help
drink.
you. That's really going to help you.
Focus.
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle there.
We're drinking for literacy here.
So that's right.
Side of that one. Because you reread the paragraph, take the drink. You gotta reread the drink.
You're right. It's just a cycle.
All right, everyone. That we are a minute here. We're about to be done. So we want to thank all of you for joining us. You're a great audience, great drinking game rolls. We really appreciate it. And our geek hosts today have been
Cassie.
Bri.
I'm Alice.
I'm Phil.
All right, so you can find us online at Educating Geeks, and this podcast will go up on our website, which is educatinggeeks.com, on July 4th. So take a listen and hear yourself give some awesome drinking game rolls. Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.